Group D distributions are out for YieldMax. Just want to take a quick review of those, see how those stack up. So here's the announcement. Clearly, it is Group D. The big one, of course, is MSTY, which I guess I took a guess at this. I figured they might do $1 just to keep people happy. I thought they didn't necessarily make $1, but they kept it at $1, keep investors happy. Hopefully for a rebound in this one in both the implied volatility as well as the underlying equity of strategy or the underlying commodity of, I guess you'd call it a commodity of Bitcoin. But primarily I'm looking for the implied volatility of hopefully Bitcoin and strategy to go up to allow it to pay the massive dividends MSTY's been paying. But for now, they keep it at $1, or $1.01 to be specific. I figure they might do that. It does line up with their past distributions. And in general, I think they like to keep that status of being a $1 payer. So we'll see how that goes in the future. But for MSTY holders, I guess you're getting $1. That said, it will make your ETF price go down by $1. As I always say, I guess they can pay you whatever they want necessarily. It just depends that payoff between what the ETF price does and what the distribution is. But for those, I guess, who own it, they're going to get another $1. Good news to MSTY shareholders from that perspective if you're relying on that monthly distribution. On top of that, winner was pretty high, $3.29. SMCY, just under $1.91. Salty and LFGY, 2 weekly pairs, 62 and 51 cents. LFGY, I think this one's been pretty good, at least relative to its past. So good to see that one bounce back. AMZY, 46 cents. Chippy, 41 cents. GPTY, 36, almost 37 cents. Aptly, 35, almost 36 cents. RDTY, 29 cents. XYZY, 28 cents. Let's say Disney, 21, 22 cents. YQQQ, 21 cents. QDTY, STTY, respectively, 17 and 15 cents. Your YMAG and YMAX are 15 cents and 8 cents. So pretty good with the YMAG. YMAX a little light. Whoops, didn't mean to click that. Ulti, one of the people that's been followed for a while. Pretty standard, not at 10 cents, but 9.2 cents. So pretty good there. And then AIYY at 13.93 cents. As far as reactions, just from the people I'm looking at, yeah, so this guy here, I think YieldMax is trying their best to keep MSTY payouts above $1 because if it drops, there will be a massive sell-off. What are your thoughts? Yeah, I guess there might be a sell-off, but people that are buying this that track it, you can track their cash positioning, which I'll do if you want, and you can see how much money they have and how much cash they've gained. Of course, there is the payoffs that sometimes they use their cash not to pay out distributions, but to restructure a synthetic position. Excuse me. That has gone negative on them by quite a bit if the underlying equity goes down. Alternatively, if the underlying equity goes up, they can cash out that synthetic and increase their cash positioning. But they definitely didn't make $1 based on the calls they sold because they did use some of it to restructure how their synthetic was structured. Yeah, I think they're probably keeping it above $1 to satisfy investors. If it dropped below $1, you'd probably have some people sell off. Maybe not this for the smartest reason, just because every time they pay a distribution, the ETF price does fall by what the distribution is. So therefore, if you own the ETF and they paid a 10-cent distribution, the ETF price would fall by 10 cents. You pay $1 distribution, it falls by $1. So if you have the intention of holding it for at least a decent amount of time, you want the distributions to pay your income. And I suppose if you're relying on it for an income basis, it is good they keep the distribution somewhat consistent. Whether that means they're actually making that much or they're giving somewhat like a return of capital back to the investor. But I do expect MSTY, particularly Bitcoin, this is my own opinion, I expect it to be more volatile going into the end of the year, specifically with the rate cuts that are happening and the commodities like gold that are storming higher, and as well as just general growth in the area. So that's just my own opinion, but I think MSTY might be a good investment going into the end of the year, but that's just me. Some of the other people, yeah, I don't know. Is YMAX even right? Yeah, I said YMAX looked a little low. I'll just start tracking the weeklies, actually see what they own. So far, I mainly focused on the single stock ETFs. I'm going to add to the chart later with the weeklies. That said, the weeklies are a little bit more complicated for what they own. For example, I know Ulti has a full portfolio of not just options, but they own, I think, put options. They own the stock. They sell calls against it. So I'll think of a good way to break that down, show you what they own and have that being collected on an automated basis so that you can get a visual of what they own, not just look at a spreadsheet. But let's just jump into Group D for the breakdown. You go to my site. This site here, it is a free site, no ads or anything. I just try to collect the YieldMax data and present it in a visually appealing way. You can break it down by groups. If you got any opinions on what would be better data to track, I'm always open to people's opinions. I kind of track what I think is important, and then I usually add to it as I look at it and I think to myself, what would be a better item to track? What would be a better item or better visualization to see? or what would be better to see on a time series basis. We can see how stuff's trending. But I guess my first chart here is just an overall. I got the YieldMax Group D. You can filter based on Group D, and you can also filter based on their percent return. Percent return, of course, is what their distribution is. So like MSTY, for example, $1 divided by what the recent price was, $15.60. So that comes to a percent return of 6.48%. So the percent was really good. It was over 5, so it was SMCY, both over 5%. AIYY, the 14-cent distribution doesn't seem like a lot, but when you got a $2.83 stock, it's a pretty good, almost 5% distribution for the month. I will add that so I am taking the recent price. The recent price probably isn't the best, at least right now, probably isn't the best compare. I just find something that's take at the recent price if you would have bought it yesterday or today. But when they declared the dividend, of course, the recent price on ex-dividend day will drop by the dividend. So maybe I should, I guess I don't know how to really think about it. But for those who are looking for the distribution based on a recently price paid, it is 6.48%. There's different ways you can think about that, but for those who are looking for the optimal return, or I shouldn't say return, but distribution based on what they're spending, these percent metrics illustrate that. AMZY was 3.11%, XYZY was 2.88%, Aptly 2.56%, and then DISO was 1.69%. So Group D, I do have in-depth kind of breakdowns for each of these stocks. I will note XYZY, I do not have an in-depth breakdown for that one because on the YieldMax website, you can take a look yourself. When you go to try to download all their holdings, it's not changing. It's quite dated. Maybe that's because of all the name changes. It went from Squares and it was SQY for the YieldMax, and then Square went to Block and it went to XYZ ticker, and then YieldMax changed their ticker to XYZY. I'm not sure if all that kind of administrative stuff is affecting it, but it'd be nice if they updated that so I could see it. Maybe if you want to see it quick. So if we go to the YieldMax site here and we scroll down to you can see their distribution, of course. I guess what my code does is it pulls in their holdings. It doesn't actually pull in them from the site. It's rather download the holdings in an automated fashion. And then, of course, let me open that. And then I don't have it on the screen right now, but if you look at the Excel spreadsheet, you can see that the date that they have noted in the Excel spreadsheet is all at 4/1/2025. It's all for the ticker of SQY. Yeah, so it's all with the date of April. So I would provide in-depth once they upload the download holdings link in order to show exactly what they own. Technically, I might be able to scrape the data off the website. I can look at doing that. I'm not sure if does it include all the data. They do go out, so you can see right now they got their synthetic. I even got to look. So it looks like they got a synthetic. They got XYZ out to 11/21/2025. So I imagine it's at a call of 67 shares bought. Yeah, I'm not even sure if this includes all the lines or not. Do they not even have a synthetic? So they have cash, cash or treasuries, cash and cash equivalents. They got calls bought at 10,000 at 75. And then they got the treasury notes. And then it looks like they just got calls sold at 81 through 83. So maybe they don't even have a synthetic. Maybe they just are doing what you would call the poor man's covered call approach and just buying a in-the-money call option that's out to November and then using that as a collateral to sell calls against, which not a bad strategy either, but it's definitely, you don't get the same exact performance as a synthetic would be as far as tracking the individual stock. Anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent, but I just wanted to point out XYZY I don't get all the data for, but all these other ones I do. So if we want to take a look at MSTY, of course, that's the most held single stock ETF for YieldMax. The distribution you can see coming in at just over $1.01, takes the average so far down to $2.25, almost 26 cents. Distribution has been trending down as you would expect because the volatility in YieldMax and MicroStrategy, or I probably should say strategy, hasn't been anywhere near what it has been. And that too, the underlying equity's also been going down, so the synthetic hasn't really been performing the best. But they're still paying out $1, and this is basically what it looks like. For those who have owned it since inception and reinvest your dividends, if you were to start with 100 shares, you're up to about 432 shares just based on reinvested dividends. And if you take a look at not investing or reinvesting dividends, but rather keeping your cash that you receive from the distribution in a checking account or some other savings account, that would have totaled $42.89 now. So you've gotten, with an initial investment of $20, you've already got $42.89 back, and your ETF price is still like in the mid-15 range. So not a bad investment overall. That said, you can see the total return on MSTY is definitely basically flat since the end of the year. So since December of 2024, or did I say, or December of 2024, the total return on it's basically flat, a little bit of volatility up and down. But basically the ETF price has been falling, whereas the cumulative dividend has been continuing to grow in a balanced out fashion, therefore making the total return basically zero. But the return was very good from, I guess, the middle of 2024 to the end of 2024. So maybe we'll get that again at the end of the year. You can see, actually, through the months of August, September, the MSTY, I'm not necessarily saying the past will repeat, but it was relatively flat through the months of July, August, September, even going down a little bit. And last year, spring really came at the end of the year. Of course, there was an election that might have had consequential effects on Bitcoin, but the end of the year was quite volatile at the end of 2024. So I guess we'll see what happens going into the future, but just something I noticed from looking at the charts. How MSTY is structured currently, I did just make a video on this, so I just want to see if anything's changed. MSTY or MicroStrategy underline is up a little bit today, $1.94. MSTY up 1.75%. Their positioning looks about the same as it was prior. They got a few calls sold between 347.50 and 365. Most of them, of course, at 360 and 355. And they do have some slight upside protection via credit spreads, but it's not on the whole position sold. But right now, with the MicroStrategy share price at 333, these are all currently, they're not worthless right now. There's a probability that they hit, but assuming the stock price does not change meaningfully or above 347.50, these will expire worthless. And then let's just check the last few days in terms of their fund holdings. This is what I mean. The last distribution was August of 2027, and since then their cash position is low. That said, their synthetics not as bad as it used to be, but the last couple of days, their cash positioning has been somewhat flat. But once that distribution hits the next dividend date, you will see the cash position go down by exactly how much the distribution is, for the most part, unless they're doing anything else that would impact their cash positioning. And that will take the ETF price, which this green line is the ETF price. It's just the cash plus the other contracts plus the synthetic value all added together. That will take that down. If you take the cash positioning down, leave these other metrics relatively unchanged, the ETF price will fall by that much as well. So that's MSTY. SMCY has been good. I usually just want to touch, or maybe I'll just touch base on the distributions. So AMZY came in at 46 cents, a little less than it has been, averaging at about 63 cents. That said, AMZY has been pretty consistent. It goes up and down, but yeah, you can see with your own eyes what the trending's been. SMCY, jump to that one here quick. That one is an all-time low, actually, of 91 cents. That one has never been below $1. I did not know that, I guess, just looking at it. But yeah, SMCY, 91 cents, not bad. If you look at what the share price is right now, go take a look at the in-depth metrics. So it is $16.30, so it's still pretty good from a percentage basis, but the lowest of all time. And that said, this fund did start at 50. So back when it was at 50, of course, it could pay a higher distribution given the collateral that it had. But yeah, interesting. Here's how it's been trending over time. SMCY, the ETF price actually bounced back a little bit. I noticed they used a lot of cash on like September 8th over that weekend. It looks like their synthetic was quite a bit low. It's negative $3.52. Now it's actually positive. It's $1.48. It's gone up to $2.40. I mean, they used a lot of cash. They used $18.05 to $13. They used between $4 or $5 to restructure the synthetic significantly. And if you look at it, I guess the synthetic's now at 40 here in the red line. Stock price, of course, when I look at this chart, it's by the underlying. So the stock price is almost kind of 47, 48. So there is a big gap between where the stock price currently is, where the synthetic is. Therefore, given the fund, yeah, there's pretty large. I mean, they got $14 in cash. The ETF price is $16.09. That difference driven primarily by the synthetic value. That said, they used a lot of cash to make their synthetic. Basically, what they did with the synthetic then is the synthetic's at 40. I guess I don't have what the previous synthetic was, but I can guarantee you it wasn't at 40. It was probably much higher, 50 or 60. So when you bring that down to 40, which gives you the right to buy the shares at 40 a share, like they cost a decent amount of money to do that. So that's what I mean by using your cash to restructure your synthetic to a lower strike price. Usually always costs money to do that. And in the future, I hope to track the synthetics. I think that'd be an interesting thing to track. As I say, if you got any ideas of stuff to track, let me know. But I think tracking the time series positioning of the synthetic would be very interesting where their strike prices are. The only thing I have to think through is some of like, if you go to like MSTY, they don't just have a synthetic structured at one price. They have their synthetic at 3 different prices. So maybe a bar that shows the total synthetic shares or synthetic contracts that they have, and then maybe have that bar partitioned out percentage-wise by what the strike is at. That might be a good way to do it. So I'll look to do that in the future, but that's SMCY. DISO, not a large fund, pretty consistent. Dividends up from where it was last time, but below the average of 46 cents. Apple's been at least the underlying equity has been a really good performer lately. You can see the distribution this time is right about where the average is, 37 cents. We got 35.7 cents. So just about where the average has been for Apple. Been a very steady pair. As you can see, the increase, you can see how steady they are based on how this green chart's going up. It's almost a line with a slope that's somewhat constant. It kind of shows how consistent their dividend's been. This will look at those who've owned it since inception date. They got $10.96 provided back so far. And the ETF price is definitely down from 20. But total return, not the greatest, but not terrible either. And then AIYY, this is of course the last one. Stock price has taken a big hit, so therefore the 13.9% cent distribution as a percent is not too bad. But as an investment, this one hasn't been very good. $20, and now your total return is sitting at just under 14. Most of that, of course, is the cumulative dividend paid. Yeah, so I think that's the updates I want to provide for Group D. Those are the distributions. Let me know what you think, but thanks for tuning in.